You're watching Powerline America. A series of new polls this week shows President Donald Trump's approval rating hitting the lowest point of his second term. But this story isn't just about numbers. It's about a widening and potentially decisive rift opening between the White House and the American people it serves. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Let's start with what the surveys actually say. In the span of just a few days, 3 major respected national polls all landed with the same basic finding. A Marist poll from January 12th to 13th gave the president a net approval rating of negative 18 points. An Economist YouGov poll from the 9th to the 12th showed a net negative 14, and an AP NORC poll from the 8th to the 11th put him at a net negative 19. Now, approval ratings fluctuate. A point or two up or down is normal, but what's striking here is the consistency. These are not outliers. They are separate surveys using different methodologies, all concluding that well over half the country currently disapproves of the job President Trump is doing. The Real Clear Politics average, which smooths out all the polls, puts his approval at 42.4% as of yesterday. That's the lowest point since his re-election. The White House response was swift and dismissive. A spokeswoman told Newsweek the president is delivering on his promises and that the American people remain firmly aligned with his agenda, calling this the mainstream media's so-called polling. That is the official line. But the data tells a more complicated story. Because this decline wasn't just among groups that have always been skeptical. It was, as Newsweek reported, observed across key demographic groups, including working-class Americans. Among that group in the Marist poll, his net approval was also negative 18 points. This is significant. The working-class vote, particularly without a college degree, has been a cornerstone of Trump's political coalition. If that foundation is showing cracks, it's not just a bad polling week. It's a signal that the political ground itself might be shifting. So, the question becomes, why now? What has happened in the first year of this second term that has driven these numbers to a new low? To understand that, we have to look beyond the top-line approval number and into what people are actually saying about this presidency. A CNN poll conducted by SSRS, released just before these others, provides that deeper look. And its findings are stark. A majority of Americans, 58%, call the first year of Trump's second term a failure. A majority say he is focused on the wrong priorities and doing too little to address the cost of living. When asked to choose the country's top issue, Americans picked the economy by a nearly 2-to-1 margin. And on that defining issue, 55% say Trump's policies have worsened economic conditions. Think about that. The central promise of this presidency, in both its iterations, has been economic revival. Make America great again. Yet, after a year back in office, a clear majority believes things have gotten worse. But it's not just the economy. The CNN poll found broad concerns about the use of presidential power. 58% say Trump has gone too far in using the power of the presidency. Only 36% say he has had the right priorities, down from 45% near the start of the term. Perhaps most telling for a politician who built a brand on being an outsider fighting for the forgotten man, only 1/3 of Americans now say they believe Trump cares about people like them, the worst rating of his political career. This paints a picture of a presidency that is, in the public's view, simultaneously ineffective on the issue that matters most and overreaching in its exercise of power. That is a politically toxic combination. Now let's add some historical context. Second terms are traditionally difficult for presidents. They often face what pundits call the second-term curse. Scandals emerge, the opposition mobilizes, the agenda stalls. Barack Obama and George W. Bush both saw their approval ratings decline in their second terms. In fact, the Real Clear Politics average shows Trump's current approval is almost identical to where Obama and Bush were at the same point in their second terms. So, in one sense, what we're seeing is part of a historical pattern. But with Trump, the pattern has unique contours. His base remains remarkably solid. Nearly 9 in 10 Republicans approve of his performance. The decline is happening among independents, where his approval is just 29%, and among key segments of his own coalition, like the working-class voters we mentioned. This creates a paradox. He is both historically unpopular for a modern president at this stage, and yet retains historically strong support from his own party. That is the definition of a polarized political environment. It's not that everyone is moving away from him, it's that the country is dividing further into 2 immovable camps, with a shrinking, unhappy middle that is currently breaking against him. Which brings us to the stakes. What does this moment actually mean? First, and most immediately, it means vulnerability for the Republican Party heading into the 2026 midterm elections. The Newsweek article on these polls explicitly notes the findings carry implications for the Republican Party ahead of the 2026 midterms and may impact Trump's ability to advance his policy agenda. Politics is simple math. If the president's party is defending congressional seats while his approval is underwater, especially with independents, they're likely to lose seats. Persistent dissatisfaction, as the article notes, could challenge the GOP's efforts to maintain majorities in Congress. Second, it reveals a fundamental disconnect. The White House narrative of a peace president delivering on promises is colliding with a public narrative of misplaced priorities and a struggling economy. When the official story and the public's lived experience diverge this sharply, it creates a crisis of credibility. That crisis doesn't just hurt the president, it further erodes trust in the institution of the presidency itself. Finally, this moment tells us something about the American political landscape in 2026. We are in an era where tribal loyalty is strong, but it is not infinite. Even within the MAGA movement, the CNN poll found that about half say Trump should be doing more on the economy. Support can be firm, but not blind. Voters, even partisan voters, are making cost-benefit calculations. Is this working for me? The president's spokeswoman dismissed these polls as media creations. But polls are not the story. They are the thermometer. They measure the fever. The story is the illness, the deep-seated concerns about the economy, about presidential power, about being heard. So, what comes next? Either these numbers are a temporary dip, a moment of frustration that will pass as economic indicators change or new events capture attention. Or they are the early warning of a broader political reckoning in November. In the end, approval ratings are a snapshot. But this particular snapshot shows us an America that is frustrated, divided, and searching for answers that the current political conversation doesn't seem to be providing. The question for the year ahead is not just whether President Trump's numbers will recover, but whether our politics can bridge the gap between the story Washington tells and the reality so many Americans are living. Thanks for watching Powerline America.